I'm going to read 4 selections from the novel, Whose Coffee Is It? Excuse me. And of course, there are autobiographical sections to this novel, but don't be too confident that you can pick out which one is and which one isn't. One never knows. Chapter 1. They don't see me coming. I'm a surprise. Not invisible, bypassed, but not in this shop drinking coffee from my monogram mug. There are hundreds of us, customers, and unlike me, most of them are not here every morning. Being overlooked is new to me. Until I was 70, it didn't happen. But now, 8 years later, I know I'll have to get used to it. The inevitable must be faced, or things get worse. A woman my age with bleached hair and thick makeup is grotesque. Besides, I'm too tired for masks. The coffee shop is full of smells from Santo Domingo to the house blend. The air conditioning works, music plays, everything but heavy metal and rap, so I don't get blasted off my stool. The clerks are all in college or law school and they like their work. They will even split the OJ and pour half in a thick glass with ice. I pay attention to details and I listen to strangers. The arrangement of their words, their pauses, evasions, and little movements. It's an international place. Spanish is in the air, but French too, once in a while. Sometimes I learn more than I want to know from a man in love with his cell phone. Truth is slippery. I can only speculate, but I have time to do just that. What is acceptable here? What passes for normal? I'm not sure, but some people get too near the edge and have actually been barred. One man was cruel to the clerks. He called it teasing, and he tried to get a political rise out of the regulars, but he was met with silence at every turn. After 4 months, he just stopped coming. He drove a fancy car and liked to gloat over the erosion of democratic power after 9/11. Maybe his wife got sick or he moved to Florida. Age brings change sooner or later. Life brought it later to me. My husband and my best friend died in the same month. It's been a year and the weather hasn't changed. It just rains more this summer and sometimes the power fails in the late afternoon. Atlanta is a city of trees. Some fall. This whole neighborhood hates change, not just the old folks. Protest groups have formed to fight legal battles and to pester the zoning board about a new house that looks like a poor man's castle with a false 4th floor and a 3-car garage. Concrete monuments to bad taste have replaced ordinary colonials and split levels. It has become a community of teardowns. Trees mean nothing to these builders. Down they come too, and a new house goes up. Sod is laid and a few shrubs added. It's hard to tell who the owners are. They don't have children who play on the lawn or hang out the windows. In July, the power didn't go out and the heat increased. So I only traveled from the swimming pool in my apartment complex back to my bedroom, where the grab bars above my tub make me feel safe. Sunbathing in a wide brim hat with bottled water and sunscreen at the ready seemed a thing of the past. For a few weeks, I took a nap before and after lunch. I fell asleep in my recliner, digesting a few pages of reading Lolita in Tehran. Then, after my tuna sandwich, I crawled between the sheets with the curtains drawn. My bedroom dark and cool. Sometimes I even used a light quilt. I don't pay the electric bill here. The dog days of summer, only nobody has one. A tenant smuggled in a kitten and got caught. She didn't last long. There's a waiting list so they can enforce the rules. 98 degrees, 95, 97, one day follows another. And the sidewalks steam up after the rain when it does come. Then I go out again and sit by the pool after dark and think about my husband. He liked air conditioning on low. worried about the light bill, bought store brands, and cringed at the idea of a T-bone steak until the day he died. We didn't have to worry about money then. I used to listen to his stories about sharing an unfinished basement with an aunt and her wild son. Only a curtain separated the two families. He and his sister ate kidney beans out of a can and too many pancake suppers. A far cry from the fresh squeezed orange juice and granola that he came to expect from me every morning. Sometimes the best way to be heard is to whisper, but I couldn't whisper. Recovering from laryngitis, I stayed in my new apartment at first. I moved in on Memorial Day weekend, and if I took the holidays seriously, I'd have the blues as well as a halo of silence. So I played it safe and sat in front of CNN with a tall glass of lemonade. Veterans passed before my eyes. World War I, World War II, the Korean conflict, Operation Desert Storm, and now the war in Iraq. What I didn't see were the coffins covered with stars and stripes, or the newest veterans with missing legs, young men who believed they were invulnerable, men who might have survived motorcycle races or an impulsive dive from a cliff had they not enlisted. Once I moved beyond the confines of my apartment and the pool, it took me a long time to settle into the rhythms of the coffee shop. It wasn't just laryngitis that I had that first month, or age. There were other older women who came in, but none who stayed long. The first man I got to know was the one I liked best, a special ed teacher who graduated from law school but couldn't pass the bar. I like modesty, and I don't pry, so I didn't ask how many times he tried. John, the famous 2-year-old who saluted his father's coffin and who ended up somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean separated from his bones, tried 3 times before he passed. I once had a black friend who got in on the quota system back in the 50s, and I never asked him either, but he didn't give up and finally set up practice in his father's law office. We've lost touch, so you can see how little I know about law school and the bar. I don't even watch Law and Order. My husband did, but he's gone, and I try not to think about him all the time. It's hard not to. The coffee shop brings relief. Everything distracts. The regulars come and go. They move away or get too sick to make the effort. Some die. Last week I went to a wake, and it is all we talked about the next day, but nobody said a word about the corpse looking natural. I imagine there are customers who think twice before spending all that money for a grande latte when Folgers Instant waits at home. But coffee has little to do with it. One man, a few years shy of retirement, said, "All they need is a shower here, and I'd have everything I want." He's getting a divorce, and sometimes his wife comes in with him. One morning, a carefully turned out honey blonde in beige and chocolate brown came through the door. "That's our divorce attorney," he said. "She's retired and only works part-time. Nothing's cheap." Anyway, my friend who couldn't pass the bar comes every day too, but never at the same time. So we cross paths only 3 or 4 times a week. His name is Saul Bachner, and he's from New Jersey. His father was a cabbie, so he has a repertoire of stories that has yet to run dry. All about stickball and kids he went to grade school with, about last-minute tickets for Broadway musicals and the price of property on the Jersey Shore. He's kept up with his friends and made new ones. It's easy to see why. My friend is not a showboat, and his sense of humor cracks me up. I'm going to depart from the script for one moment to introduce Phil Shapiro to you, who's sitting in the back. If you would stand, Phil. Phil is the prototype for this character, and he said to me when I showed him the draft, he said, "That's okay, Junebug." He said, "Just remember this, make me taller and give me hair." Here we are. My friend is not a showboat, and his sense of humor cracks me up. He's retired too from the DeKalb County school system, tall with a full head of white hair. He must have been an imposing figure behind a lectern. Now, he's careful with his money, and though he's always going off on a cheap flight to Costa Rica or Prague, he buys his clothes at Value City and drives a car that has seen better days, carefully. There are no dents in it. He often walks to the coffee shop. It's not far. He owns an apartment building up the road a piece, as they say here in the New South. He lives in one of the apartments and keeps an eye on things. Something is always breaking down, and he usually knows how to repair it. Eric Hoffer once said, "Maintenance is everything." And the longer I think about that quote, the more it covers. Before my husband died, we had a tree trim party every Christmas. Everyone brought an ornament or a bottle, and some brought both. Bachner brought a huge pecan pie from Costco. He knows a bargain. People fought over it, and they thought I made it myself because I slipped it onto a crystal plate before the guests started arriving. For my birthday, he gave me a little eyeglasses holder, a pottery thing from my bedside table so my glasses wouldn't fall on the floor. Bachner knows all about old age, too. Today there were bombs in London. Some exploded underground, one blew off the top of a bus. Time passed and there were more bombs. The bombs were impotent, but the police shot a man who wore a heavy overcoat. It was hot in London, and the man ran from the police. Who knows why? He was an electrician going to work. There were apologies and explanations, and the days dragged on. This week, a new version of the story emerged, but one thing was sure, there were 7 bullet holes in the electrician's body. More than one customer at the coffee shop said in so many words, "We're next." The Center for Disease Control already has those big rocks between it and the sidewalk. Soon an argument started. "Big rocks? Don't you mean boulders? Would it be New York, DC, or us?" They might speculate all day. I ordered a Russian tea biscuit and a refill. Soon iced coffee replaced the usual, and the regulars switched from pottery cups with their initials inked on the side to tall plastic glasses. A few diehards drank espresso. Headlines continued to focus on gas prices and the war. Atlanta's homeless are now forbidden to beg from tourists. And today, Coretta Scott King had a stroke. One customer moved to Florence but came back to close on her former house. "I'm writing a pamphlet on how to survive the boat over," she said. She's a widow too, almost 50, radiant. Florence has a lot in common with Paris, all that art and literary history. But I've never been to either place, so I'm jealous. But that doesn't stop me from reading coffee table books in color at the library. I can hardly pick one up. They are so heavy with culture. Everything is new here. The coffee shop, the whole shopping center, and my apartment complex. But it wasn't always that way. It's hard to find words for what was replaced. For years, a motel stood in the back of the former strip mall. Men and women rented rooms by the hour, and business was brisk. It took me a while to catch on. 3 afternoons in a row, a tall woman in stilettos with 2-inch platforms and a silver miniskirt sauntered by with her companions, a different one each day, all bald, wearing suits and conventional ties. No money was exchanged in public, but I overheard plans for a tryst as I walked by on my way to Baskin-Robbins. By then, a police precinct had moved in, and the liquor store did more business than the grocery. I stopped buying ice cream after dark, and eventually the store moved out, along with a branch of Kinko's and a laundromat. So imagine my surprise last winter to return from a trip to the East Coast and find 2 bulldozers and a rock pile where that strip mall had been. Excuse me. A group of hardhats. I need some water here. A group of hardhats stood surveying the mall ruins. They had already begun work on the new apartment complex, too. I'm not an optimistic woman, but these images changed me, at least for a while. I was the fourth tenant to sign a lease, and even then, there were plans to expand the apartments up a hill in back, where the motel used to be. I like it here on level ground. The first floor seems like a wise choice for the future. Chapter 9. Oscar Wilde was right about drink being the curse of the working class. A little farther up the scale, martinis have their own special curse. Memory being what it is, the lemon twists or olives begin to blur, hospital conversations pick up, and finally fall with a lot of overlaps in between. One final dinner party in Connecticut outshone all the others. You know, so much is skipped over in terms of the plot between that first chapter and this. I should tell you that the main character, marries someone who starts out as a microbiologist and ends up as a psychiatrist. And so it's at this point she's talking about dinner parties after the residency, after the residency. Okay. One final dinner party in Connecticut outshone all the others. After it was over, I never went to another hospital function or invited more than 3 psychiatrists at one time to our own celebrations. Things descend into shop talk. First, administrators who don't give a rip about patients, insurance companies that dictate medical care, and all true, but none of it interesting to anyone not working in the field. And then one other thing I should tell you, early in their relationship, just after they were married, and when her husband had decided to become a psychiatrist, a nurse on the psychiatry rotation said to him, I want you to have my husband's library. And so he was very busy and tired, and he put off answering her for a long time. And so when he tells his wife about it, she said, well, let's go over and see what it is. And he says, well, what do I know? It might be a collection of Reader's Digest condensed books. But she convinces him to go. And so this whole library, it fills about 6 shelves, were books that weren't technical, as technical books were given to the hospital. And this, of course, has really happened to me and my husband. The books were all extra books that he had he had quite a fund for books that he just bought. It could be biographies of people who had years ago been in state hospitals. It could be I Never Promised You a Rose Garden by Hannah Green. Just a whole list of books, 3-volume books on early childhood development, all kinds. So this turned out to be a real library, and the main character in the book thinks about him all the time, because little by little she read these books because she didn't have any money to do anything else but walk around the block and read books. So she thinks about him, and he's, you might say, an enormous force in her life, more so even than in her husband's. Okay, and this physician's name was Lawler. And the other thing was he was a beloved physician, and he had a heart attack, and they told him, the usual scenario, what he could eat, how he could walk, what he could think, blah, blah, blah. And he did all those things, and he died 4 weeks later. So the whole thing had a haunted feeling about it, the books and this experience. Okay, so to go on. I once thought that Lawler's library would be my basis for informed questions and fascinating arguments, but I was dead wrong. One night in the hospital cafeteria, I ate supper with Wes and a third-year resident. I guess I wanted to show off, if the truth be known. So I initiated a discussion about that 3-volume set of Bowlby's research on child development. Who's Bowlby? The resident asked. I was speechless. The latest volume had been touted at length in the previous Sunday's New York Times book review, and I thought that fact alone would be enough to make any resident feel it was a hot topic. Well, maybe if Dr. Lawler could have risen from his grave with a cigarette in his hand, safe now underground, at least he would want to hear about Bowlby. I thought a lot about Lawler that fall. In some ways, he was a bridge to Wes and our new life at the Institute of Living. I had time to think about a lot of things. Wes was on call more than he'd expected. He slept in a little house on the grounds in a huge bed that had been special ordered for the 7-foot-tall resident who wouldn't have, so the 7-foot-tall resident wouldn't have his feet dangling over the end. Yet I wasn't lonely. Wes called home in between emergencies. "I wish you were here with me," he whispered. "Well, I wish I were too. Maybe we could share your scrubs." I whispered back. Eventually, I made friends with one of the wives, the only one who, like me, had no children. Sometimes, though, I complained to her. "You expect too much," she said. "Our husbands don't have time to sleep, let alone read Emily Dickinson to us. The Institute of Living is not an 18th century salon." She was a comparative literature major from Columbia, and I satisfied myself with listening to her stories of Lionel Trilling back when he was the star of the English department, and the words New York intellectual still meant something. One real friend can pull you through, and she was it. But I'm straying from martinis and psychiatrists, those take it off the income tax hospital parties where nobody really wants to be there, where anyone at the dinner table with sense and a rich fantasy life keeps their mouth shut and leaves early. This approach worked until one Saturday night when I drank like the others and watched things fall apart. It started with slurred words I couldn't comprehend. Then the doctor to my left stood up just as the soup bowls were cleared. "You have insulted my wife, sir," he proclaimed to the man on my right. Silence followed, and I never did figure out the nature of the insult. Later, his wife said, "Pay no attention to all John's teasing. Our boy acts like a girl, and we've done everything. Brought him cowboy outfits, baseball mitts, nothing helps." Her husband then dropped his head in the mashed potatoes, and soon after left the table for the bathroom, where I later threw up on the hostess's quilt, a handmade treasure from her grandmother. Someone had draped it over the towel rack. I felt so bad. The next morning, I sent a dozen roses to the host with a letter of apology. I had left one blue suede sandal there, and it came back on Monday night with a note pinned to it. "How can a nice Jewish boy marry someone like you?" And Wes wasn't even Jewish. It must have been his horn-rimmed glasses and beard, a stereotype to be sure. I don't remember saying anything beyond, "I've had enough paella." In fact, I have no memory of what they served for dessert. Well, Wes told me you let a few things slip. The hostess's husband was insufferable, if we need a clinical category. In the end, nobody would work with him, but his reputation didn't stop me from thinking, why did Wes marry me? I knew the answer, and it wasn't for my sterling self-control. Wes married me for my mind, or so he said, certainly not for my winning ways under the sheets. Though who knows how all of it comes together. I learned about sex from Webster's Unabridged and the Reader's Digest, and I tried hard to be a good girl. None of this book learning helped much, so I was very, very careful. Ignorance and fear go together. The summer I graduated from high school, wedding plans for others seemed to pop up out of the blue, unbidden, and they scared me. I had a boyfriend, but we didn't go far enough for him, so we broke up the week before the senior prom. That June, my best friend fainted after teaching a Sunday school class in the Methodist church we both attended. By the time she began rushing to the bathroom before we walked to work, I had guessed her secret. We hand-dipped ice cream at a cafe a block from the high school for $1 an hour. My mother must have known the truth all along because she pulled back and didn't force scrambled eggs on either of us. We wore white uniforms and tennis shoes to match, and we were careful not to miss a night of removing their scuff marks. My friend didn't miss a day of work until October when I was away at college with a new life of mixers and smokers and bonfires for homecoming weekend. Her wedding announcement was the first piece of mail at the dorm. A birth announcement soon followed. I held tight to a scholarship to Bowling Green University in Ohio, not far from Toledo, where we drove on blind dates for 3-2 beer, and about as romantic as a Wednesday night prayer meeting, which, by the way, I attended that last summer. So bored was I with Manchester, Connecticut. I was a bridesmaid in 2 weddings that Christmas, and they were rush jobs too. So the following summer was full of baby showers I didn't attend. I spent my sophomore year in the college library looking for the meaning of life, having left John Wesley and his orderly principles behind in a history class. Then I hung around with gay men as soon as I learned what one was. They were safe. Getting pregnant might ruin my life, and any girl with brains in those days knew that rubbers broke. Not that I ever saw one. I kept up my grades, kept my scholarship, and worried about the future. While other girls in the dorm played bridge and knitted Argyle socks after supper, I sat on my top bunk, content to watch them and copy my class notes on 3x5 cards. The most exciting thing that happened that year was a bus trip to the Toledo Museum, where the drawings of Van Gogh were displayed. It was my first visit to an art museum, and I was drawn to the potato eaters, a vision of gloom and poverty that seemed more real than his sunflowers or starry nights. The following summer, I worked at an upscale furniture store in Hartford and learned a lot about Knoll and Ames. I had a close call with a furniture salesman, and then I met Wes. Westcott Arwood. It was his voice that brought me to his side. He could make a sentence sound like a lyric poem, add that to a sure sense of touch, and I was his. I knew how important it was to love your work, to have a choice in what you did all day. I intended to work hard, and so did he. We believed in work, in the future. The last thing we considered was immediate gratification. The price was too high. So we became engaged without a ring. I went back to Ohio in September, and Wes answered my letters with a barrage of postcards. I still have them in 2 shoeboxes in my walk-in closet. It's important to sleep with someone you can talk to about all the things that matter. And in those early days, everything mattered to me. The only thing that didn't matter was what I'd yet to experience. Wes and I talked on park benches, on blankets in the shade of trees I didn't care to know the names of, and in cafeterias in the hours before closing. We talked until the chairs were cleaned and stacked on top of tables, until the ketchup bottles were taken from the booze and a dish rag passed over the slick surface between us. With or without a sandwich, it all seemed like a picnic to me. Excuse me. My mind slips to the nights after work years later, when I would hold Wes's head in my lap on the couch. This was our ritual for a long time, even when he was too tired to talk. When we moved to our final house, I wanted to buy 2 recliners so we could rest side by side and enjoy a mutual sense of collapse, but I didn't. Time passed. His hair went from salt and pepper to white, and then his hairline receded. He was bald when he died. 2 more short ones. Disaster, chapter 14. Disaster seeps into the very air we breathe. Now the news is full of terror threats on the New York subway. The sky is full of rain clouds. I heard a chilling story at the coffee shop this week about childhood and Christmas. 3 women, the third being me, were talking about the holiday. There was a pause between the mention of Christmas and the first woman's voice. She owns a ranch in Texas. She's an old-fashioned liberal who graduated from Oberlin. The rancher said, "Do you know those silver Christmas trees that were popular for a while?" Everyone nodded. Ours spun around. A colored light was aimed at it. "Didn't it have ornaments?" I asked. "It did not." The owner of the ranch moved her napkin to the right and blew her nose. Then the conversation switched to what was under our trees. I was eager to tell my story. I always had a pile of gifts, even if they were cheap. Picture frames and underwear from Kresge's, Raisinets from movie theaters, keychains advertising car dealerships. I loved Christmas. I depended on it. And when I was 7, a bossy girl at school insisted there was no Santa Claus. Then my mother told me the whole truth, whereupon I had a tantrum on her bed. I couldn't stop crying, and I refused to climb under that faded chenille spread. In the morning, it was raining hard, and I woke up before breakfast. The second woman asked the Texas rancher what she got for Christmas. Well, we all got stock certificates in long envelopes laid on the carpet under our silver tree. No toys, everyone said at once, and the rancher shook her head. The third woman said, we had a pile of toys, and I'm Jewish. We celebrate both holidays. Maybe my father wanted to assimilate, I don't know. Everyone sort of chuckled at that. The image of that cold silver tree and 4 small children was slow to materialize. We seemed lost in thought, trying to imagine what our responses would have been. Would we have torn up the envelope in anger? Would we have cried? Would we have remained still and watched our parents until someone said something? The silver imagery revealed something to me that can't be put in words. Conversations like this one are rare at the coffee shop. I finally stopped listening to these disillusioned women and thought about Wes and our first Christmas together, and then our last one. That first Christmas, Wes and I had temporary jobs at a new boutique across the street from our apartment building. After Thanksgiving, business increased and so did our hours, sometimes ending as late as 9:30 in the evening. Imagine how happy we were when the owner asked Wes to shovel snow and both of us to advance from sales to looking out for shoplifters, a real problem with all the small, high-priced ornaments crammed up against imported glass from Mexico and Swedish toy trains. So I became a spy of sorts, and Wes added physical labor early in the morning, out in the elements, sweeping and shoveling. I've never had a job where I felt so appreciated. The owner was thrilled to find his business booming, and even happier when we jumped at the chance to work longer hours and weren't afraid to confront thieves. We rushed to work, ate sandwiches on the run, and saved our paychecks. Why concern ourselves with a broken elevator in our own apartment, an occasional roach, or a hard-to-find caretaker? Everything we wanted for the moment waited in those 2 buildings. In another year, we might have encountered serious snowdrifts, a lingering recession, or the kind of bronchitis that won't let up. But that year, we watched the owner pour Polish vodka and an entire bottle of grenadine syrup over a block of ice in the pottery punch bowl he still hoped to sell for $50. It was Christmas Eve, an hour before closing. Snow dusted the sidewalks and continued falling. The fruitcake was gone, and the punch reduced to pink residue, when a perennial grad student, well known in the neighborhood, pulled out a 5th of Jameson and passed it around to the staff. We wished him well too, and said goodbye to the owner, who was resting in the single Arnie Jacobson chair he had moved from the back room, and we left with the snow shovel and key. Outside, the snow now melted before it hit the ground and felt like rain on our coats. Our Christmas goose, now defrosted and dripping, waited on the kitchen table near a sack of potatoes and a can of English peas. Wes returned it to the refrigerator, and we sat on the couch watching the snow fall into the courtyard 3 floors below. I looked up eventually to see Wes, his eyes closed, still ramrod straight, as if they were open. A long-standing habit it became of pushing himself to the limit, never considering a nap. And in that final year we had together, no longer straight, but leaning a little to the side, asleep. Our final Christmas was an exercise in leftovers. Instead of a tree, red ornaments we'd kept for 30 years piled in a silver bowl, love notes to each other instead of presents, 2 Cornish game hens instead of a turkey. We poured bourbon over crushed ice and watched as that gadget on the refrigerator rushed the ice particles into our old-fashioned glasses. We rested on and off all day long and played "I'll Have a Blue Christmas Without You" too many times. Elvis passed me by in college. I was too busy studying, but his voice and legend have surfaced at odd moments since. My favorite is "That's All Right, Mama." PBS replays one of his concerts from time to time. There he stands in that silly white jumpsuit with his leg moving up and down and sweat pouring from his face. Wes and I fell asleep in chairs that Christmas afternoon. We drifted off in the middle of what might have been nostalgia, but we held on to each other later, all night long, rearranging ourselves each time one of us got up to go to the bathroom. My legs grasping his as if it mattered, as if it could save him and us. And the last very short chapter, but a half a page. Chapter 26. She's almost 89 at this point. If my reason for getting up in the morning now is to read the obits, it's not hard to roll over and grab a down pillow for the smell and the softness, and then ease myself into a morning dream. The last conversation I overheard at the coffee shop doesn't make me want to return. Not many people would hire a blind interior decorator. She must have been a family friend. As I walked away, I heard the response, "No, just cut rate." Well, I can't figure that joke out. Maybe it wasn't a joke. Maybe I really am too old. I can't be sure. Last summer, I bought a vibrator, and I use it in the afternoons, weekdays. Frying current makes a steady noise. When I was 14, my mother slept with a plumber up the street, and I thought of where his dirty fingernails might go and wept. She cried too, sometimes with the bedroom door closed. So I hung out at the library or read books alone in my room, waiting. I dreamed of escape. I dreamed of money, safety, and respect. Now I have money and respect and a vibrator. I think of my mother and wish I had not called her those names. And when I flick the switch and try to drift, nothing happens, and it takes a long time to come. And now, if you want to know whose coffee it is, I'll be signing copies of this book in the back.